My name is Shilpika. It's you can call me Shilps. Comes from a long time working on the trading floor, where saying Shilpika was too long to trade on the price of oil. So that's a dead giveaway for what I used to do before. Before I tell you what I do now, I have to say a couple of things. One, that I always feel like an imposter in these rooms because neither am I a data center operator person or am I a dude. But here we are. Facts. But what I want to do today, and thank you, Matt, for the kind invite. I have a presentation here that I might fumble through. But I was sitting in a couple of panels earlier on the stage, and they were all super informative. And I decided to change slightly what I was going to talk about. My talk today, with no money endorsement from Deep Green, was independently going to be about how the rise of inference is a generational opportunity for us to use AI infrastructure as a Trojan horse for funding all kinds of climate infrastructure. It's not rocket science, it's just what works in systems, and it's where systems have failed before, so it's really a great opportunity. But I noticed something in the panels earlier. Nobody actually said climate. Maybe I missed a few panels this morning, which is really interesting and useful, actually. So nobody said climate, and I think what we're wrestling with in this unprecedented rise of AI and AI infrastructure and the capex and the hundreds of billions and the trillions we're starting to talk about is really narrative. Is narrative and how that connects to people and their lives, and how data centers and the rise of AI cannot be external to those lives, in fact has to complement and be embedded in those lives. So to sort of illustrate the point, I'm going to tell you two stories. One, what Opna does and why the hell am I here? I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Opna, and the vision for Opna has always been, how do we build the right tools, the financing stack in the infrastructure to direct the most amount of climate capital to fund new infrastructure that presumably will be good for climate and communities with speed, with scale, and with equity. Where we started was using the power of carbon finance, which is helping stand up new projects that remove carbon through natural or engineered mechanisms. Get stood up. We get these projects stood up mostly in the Global South. We do that by partnering, on the other hand, with companies that have climate goals and get these companies to fund these projects directly, whether that's through creative financing or simple procurement. And that's the space we operate in. That's the carbon removal market. It's about $4 billion worth of market, which is small. But here's an interesting fact. Microsoft is 80% of that market. And we had to start asking why. And this is kind of like where we sort of come to why am I here. Microsoft is 80% of the market and increasing. And the rest, by the way, the stragglers are also tech companies, which is no crazy coincidence, because almost all of these tech companies about 3, 4, 5 years ago, low interest era, pre-Orange Man era, made commitments to go carbon neutral or carbon negative, whatever fancy word you want to use, by 2030, 2040, not having anticipated what AI infrastructure would do to their emissions. And that explains why they are, like the state of the carbon removal market is what it is. Now, carbon removal is not a way to fix the emissions problem. It's almost like the patch you put at the end because you can't do anything else right. You can't decarbonize, you can't reduce emissions, you just can't figure out how to run your business differently. And that's where we are today. And that is incredibly frustrating because what we do is we think carbon removal is a tool to build multi-revenue, multi-use, multi-benefit systems. So, for example, when we work with smallhold farmers or the indigenous communities or just farmers around the world that are using both natural or nature-powered engineered means to remove carbon, very often that is coupled with improvement in agricultural yields or creation of long-term jobs or co-benefits of like multitude that make that carbon removal project not only possible, but actually ensures the longevity of this project for decades to come, like beyond my time, beyond our time. And that's what we want. Now, we can keep doing this. That's great, and we do this all day. We work with some of the leading fintech, like tech names in the world. But the trajectory we've been on in the last 6 months is asking the question, can we extend this approach of building multi-purpose, multi-use carbon projects to how AI infrastructure is being built? And that question was actually prompted by some of these customers that are either entering the AI infrastructure race or are exposed to it and just can't keep paying for carbon removal. It's going to cost them millions, tens of millions, in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars in outlay, in capital outlay, and it's a cost. It's not a benefit. Sure, it's a benefit to the planet, but that's not how companies always think. So the question they started asking us was, hey, we're trying to figure out how do we expand or grow our businesses, whether I'm a telecom company or a tech company, but I do it in a way that, I am competitive, I have a business model that works, but also I am not sort of going backwards on my climate pledge because I'm reputationally exposed, also important. But importantly, how do I ensure that in a time where, and you can read all the different reports, but I'm an ex-banker, so I think about it slightly differently. In a time where nobody really knows how big the size of the AI market is going to be, are we like already exposed to overbuilding? If compute becomes the commodity that we need it to be, is the terminal value really going to be zero? It is actually. If compute equal to electrons, then we can all imagine that all the hundreds of billions that are going into infrastructure today is probably going to be worthless from a purely, this is the most expensive compute you can ever fund today. So companies are trying to also figure out how do you build businesses that are, obviously, if you're entering the AI infrastructure business, you are inherently long AI. But can you build this infrastructure in a way that creates a hedge, a price hedge, a longevity hedge, where there's other sources of revenue that are not just exposed to the rollout of AI? So that brings us to kind of the work we're doing some of these companies in helping them reimagine, essentially, a resilient, community-centric, but also a very competitive model of rolling out AI infrastructure and essentially using AI infrastructure as a Trojan horse for funding climate infrastructure without saying the word climate even once, because most people don't care. At least in Orange Man era, nobody cares. But that brings us to kind of what Matt was alluding to. What does this world of reimagining AI infrastructure as climate infrastructure look like? And for us, it's not simple, but it's also very clear. The environmental or climate problems of AI infrastructure, AI data centers today largely stems from the focus on training, the focus on siting, and the siting being super resource intensive, the lack of imagination in thinking of different structures, and basically supersizing everything. And that supersizing may work for training, and it does work for training, but that is not the future if we think that this training is actually going to be useful in application of AI. If folks like you and me and important enterprises in the world and the universities of the world, but basically every business in the world is going to adopt AI, they're not going to need to train over and over again. They're going to need inferencing. Often makes the most sense, at least in today's architecture, where the inferencing is closest to where the user is, which means that we're suddenly moving from this like monolithic, super dense clusters of not just GPUs, but dense infrastructure in already often resource-constrained regions to this opportunity to create distributed, perhaps modular, but distributed inference-driven infrastructure that serves the purpose of the user, that is obviously relevant to how data should be stored, where it should be stored, but gives us an opportunity to anchor the demand for things that obviously work from a revenue and longevity of the business perspective, but happens to be great for climate. What does that look like? Well, imagine a world where, let's just talk about here, just in London. We've got obviously power issues, we've got land issues, we've got water issues coming if they're not here yet. We've got communities starting to ask the question around, what does this mean? I mean, Matt was talking about this earlier. You know, there's a lot of dangling of carrots around all these jobs that he created. Come on, let's get real. We don't even have enough data to start to compare WE, PUEs, like all of the stuff is really like new. But what if, instead of having these ginormous clusters of data centers, we had these distributed nodes that maybe they talk to each other, maybe they don't, but each of them have the capability to anchor something that's most relevant for the site and the context they're situated in. That could look like anchoring renewables and batteries, because that costs money. That could look like anchoring the demand, being the off-taker for low-carbon materials, aka low-carbon cement, low-carbon steel. That could mean that you are able to take the waste heat, pipe that into district heating where that's available. Maybe you could grow shrimp, but perhaps you can also take that heating, convert it into cooling, because that's going to be a huge problem. Maybe you can take that heating and you can upgrade it using heat pumps and actually make carbon removal more price competitive, because heating is a big component of many of the engineered processes that we run today. Perhaps what you could do is to create benefit sharing agreements with the communities in which these projects are sited, to get buy-in and to make sure that in 5 years' time, you know, your project is not being challenged because communities are not in favor and they're not seeing the benefits. So there's myriad ways to which to imagine the world of rolling out AI infrastructure as a shared infrastructure that belongs to the communities in which it's sited, instead of being external to, instead of becoming kind of a sort of a repetition of all the things that we got wrong with fossil fuel infrastructure. We have lessons. We don't need to go far back in history. We're living the lessons today. We don't need to rewrite the story in the same way. And it's been done before. It's been done before. I'm gonna tell you a story, and then I think my 8 minutes might be up. The story I'm gonna tell you is about a time that I sort of decided that I was gonna quit my job in banking. I was going to do something really physically tough, and I was going to do it to understand why we can't address climate change and how clean water is at the heart of that crisis. So I decided, I guess as one does, to stand-up paddle big rivers entirely powered by human power. I started with the River Shannon in Ireland, which some of you may or may not know is the longest river in the British Isles. It's longer than the Severn, it's longer than the Thames. I stand-up paddle it from source all the way down to Limerick. And then I said, okay, well, I'm gonna go stand-up paddle the Ganges in India, because why not? It's a small river, really dirty, really holy, but 3,000 kilometers, no big deal. So in 2017, I finished a journey of 101 days living on the river to become the first ever person to stand-up paddle the Ganges from source to sea, which also became a Guinness World Record, male, female, doesn't matter, the first ever and the longest ever stand-up paddle journey in history. Still stands. Importantly, what people asked me after the journey oftentimes was, hey, but we saw all this like Instagram stuff, we saw all this media. Did you have internet? Because you were really, really remote. And this is what people get wrong about infrastructure. India made a strategic choice in the early 2000s to roll out telecom infrastructure as shared infrastructure. That was aided by a clever tower sharing policy, that was aided by open shared data policy, that was aided by smart capex investments that were partially funded by the government and de-risked by the government. And that has helped build India, a country of like 1.5 billion and counting. I can say that because I'm Indian. That has helped build a country of that many folks into an ecosystem where entirely new ways of living, whether that's payments, whether that's education, whether that's health, whether that's agriculture, whether that's industry, ultimately access and dignity, that's been afforded to more people at scale than I can imagine. Why? If you have the internet on your phone, and India has humongous smartphone penetration, we consume content. I think we're the second biggest content consumption country per capita. We can, through mobile. Having access to this infrastructure that was paid for and brought into policy through not always foresight, like the government, I'm pretty sure didn't know what this shared infrastructure would do, but having it in place created access and inclusion in ways that are unimaginable. Now, if we can do that for telecom, come on. We have $500 billion going into AI data infrastructure just from the top 4 biggest companies this year alone. What can we not do to create a world where we use AI? We use AI both ethically and responsibly, but we do it in a way that we still have a world that we want to live in. It's not too hot, it's not inequitable, and it's a world that we'll be proud to shape today. So let this be a call to action for each of us today, to reimagine, perhaps even in the smallest way, what are the ways in which you can create longevity and resilience and perhaps differentiation for some of you if you're building data centers to use AI infrastructure as climate infrastructure, not because it's nice to do, it is nice to do, because it's a business worth building and it's a planet that we still want to live on, and hopefully that business can complement the planet that we want to live on. So thank you.